May 13th, 2013. It's a day that people that live in this rural area will never forget, ever.
All right, what do you need to tell us?
I don't want to say that I'm crazy, but I'm just, just hearing stuff. The voice will tell me to do this and do that.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
To kill somebody.
They have a spree killer on their hands. Wherever he happens to be is where he might strike again. And we don't know where that is.
Nobody knows what's going on. Why is he doing this? Who is he targeting?
The garage door was open, and then I walked in. I shot the lady first, and I shot the old man in the front of the head.
The body count is going to continue to rise. Where is this son of a...
And then I just went blank, then I shot him.
Some crimes occur, make the evening news,
We now have the identity of all 5 victims.
and then don't survive the 24-hour news cycle. And there are some crimes that people can detect it. It's around 7 a.m., and Marcia Longfellow is worried. She's been trying to call her friend Lt.Joe Graham for quite some time and hasn't been able to reach him, and that, she thinks, is very unusual. So she goes to the gas station where he works, but he's not there. And then she notices fluttering newspapers in the wind, a short distance away from the station. She walks closer to investigate and sees something on the ground. What is that? What she finds is Lt.Joe Graham, half naked and dead, and so it begins.
I'm David A. Frankel. I'm a retired Washoe County Sheriff's Office detective in Reno, Nevada. When I got hired, after a couple years, I rotated into an undercover role where you follow the worst criminals around, and you really got an eye into how the criminals think, what they're doing. Criminals always throw curveballs, so you just got to keep an open mind and think out of the box. On that day, we got notified of a body out off of Interstate 80, and there's not much out there. I remember seeing like newspapers all over, and then the body was kind of in an area just off the road and seemed to be covered by a blanket.
The briefing deputies tell Frankel that the victim is 51 years old. His name is Lt.Joe Graham, and he works at that particular gas station a very short distance away.
The body was found at the I-80 Mustang exit. It's very familiar to people because the Mustang Ranch is at that exit.
The Mustang Ranch is a brothel about 15 miles outside of Reno. It has been there for a long time.
The Mustang Ranch, it's a popular place. You're wondering if it's related to that.
Prostitution encourages the arrival of an unsavory element in society. It waves a red flag. It says, come here and do as you wish. Come on down. You're the next contestant, and the customer is always right. The deputy coroner and Frankel together respond to look at the body.
His pants are pulled down and his shirt's pulled up. He appears to have some sort of injury.
The deputy coroner does a closer examination of the head, and he discovers 3 small caliber gunshot wounds. The general position and the indication of the body is he was killed recently, overnight, less than 12 hours. There's no evidence of a struggle, no defensive wounds. He has money in his wallet. So why is he undressed? Does the shooter want to humiliate him so when he's discovered he's naked? It could be anything.
Mr. Graham's body was found 100 yards or so from a gas station that he also worked at. We did talk to people at the gas station.
The employees say the last time they saw Elazir was last night when they closed and they all left for the evening. And there's certainly nothing out of the ordinary in this gas station this morning. There's no robbery. They say he has a truck. So where is it? They don't know. It's always important to search the surrounding area from a crime scene to determine if other evidence can be discovered. And as those investigators fan out to search the area, Detective Frankel goes to speak with the relatives of the victim.
So I was at work, and then they told me that my brother was murdered. I just didn't believe it was real. Because I had just talked to him, I just got my Mother's Day gift. You know, how is it possible? But that's it. It was right in this stretch where he was killed. And he was found here, up there. When I came, there was still blood markings over there by the stop sign. This is my brother, Ellie. You can't see it in this picture, but Ellie had a crooked smile. You know, it looked like a Popeye grin. When I was growing up, there was 15 children. My dad was a pig farmer. And I think Dad and Ellie were like mud on a pig. They were inseparable. The two of them loved the hogs. He had multiple jobs. The gas station, the mission, the newspapers. He worked for the mattress company. I don't even know when he slept, but he kept it all up. He'd always help somebody. When somebody needed something, oh, go to Ellie. He can help you. Who do you rely on when your reliable rock is no longer here? When they told me that Ellie was murdered, I thought Frank killed him.
The sister believed that Mr. Graham's brother, Frank, may have killed her brother. They had an ongoing dispute that was pretty toxic.
Detective Frankel goes to see relatives for the very purpose of trying to develop a suspect. And this family handed him a suspect on a silver platter. At 7:30 a.m., the victim, Elazir Graham, was discovered dead near the gas station where he worked. And now investigators are looking into his own brother as possibly the killer.
When they were kids, Frank and Ellie were very close. They were like two peas in a pod.
She said they will never talk about it, but something really bad happened between them, and neither one forgives the other.
Tension between Frank and Ellie grew. For 20 years, they had their rivalry.
In the prior few weeks, there had been an incident where Frank may have tried to run his brother over with a car.
She said Elazir was visiting his parents at the family home, and the brother decided to come by as well. And when that happens, there's always going to be trouble. Frank allegedly announces he's going to kill his brother by running him over and attempts to do the same. blood runs hot. Whatever is convenient becomes a weapon.
I just remember Ellie just saying, you know, my leg's messed up. I'm like, are you okay? Yep. And then the police were called.
But Elazir wouldn't pursue anything, so the sheriff's department drops the charge.
Immediately you're thinking we might have a really good lead, so you definitely have to go check that out.
There's nothing more dangerous than a feud that goes on for 20 years, and then a recent event where it escalates. It gets more hateful by the minute. They find Frank, bring him into the office for interrogation. He is hostile. He is angry. He finds it to be ludicrous that they think he would kill his brother. And they say, well, why not? You tried to 2 weeks ago. Finally, he says, look, I just got into town. I've been driving a truck for weeks. He's an over-the-road trucker. They check with his employment, and that's true.
We were able to verify that Mr. Graham's brother, Frank, was not involved in his murder.
He's just a brother who doesn't like his dead brother. But that's all he is. So it's back to square one.
You just have to reassess any other information you can get and keep tracking down people with connections to the victim.
Now it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and Frankel hears back from the officers searching the crime scene area where they discover a pickup truck in a ditch along I-80.
You certainly have to go look at it because it's in the vicinity of where the body's found and see if there's any connection.
They search the truck, assuming it belongs to Mr. Graham, and they don't find anything of any interest. So they run the plates, and they discover it belongs to someone else entirely.
It came back to people with the last name of Pape, and they lived in Fernley, Nevada, which was in the next county over. It's what we call a cow county, meaning it's a lot of farmland. It was a pretty peaceful little town.
Robert Pape is 84 years old, and he lives with his wife, Dorothy. And his truck is abandoned within a quarter mile of the murder scene. Now, why is that?
Did they see anything, or are they involved? You have to keep an open mind of it could be any of the above.
He may be 84 years old, but all it takes is 6 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger.
First thing we do is call the police department in that jurisdiction and ask them, hey, can you make contact with the Papes and ask them if they know anything about their vehicle being out here at the Mustang exit.
And the officer that answers the phone says, boy, that's amazing. We found his house on fire in Fernley this morning.
That was pretty alarming, like, what's going on?
The 911 call came in at 5:30 this morning. When the fire department responded, they discover a pickup truck in the garage was on fire. The fire had also spread to the house. The firemen went in to clear the house, but found no one home. Robert and Dorothy Pape are not in this house.
I felt that it wasn't this crazy coincidence. A light bulb went off. These might be linked together.
What is going on here? Something is.
So we responded out to Lyon County in the Fernley area where the other crime scene was to see if we could help with anything that they needed.
My name is Marty Dews. I was a detective for the Lyon County Sheriff's Office. When the Washoe County Sheriff's Office calls us, we're now looking at possibly sitting on a piece of evidence for their case. Everybody was kind of getting extremely confused. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together oddly.
Things are going through your head, like, was Mr. Graham involved in something at the Pape's house? Did he steal their truck?
We know that the fire department responded to a truck on fire in the garage. They assume it is a truck belonging to the resident, Mr. Robert Pape. However, at 7:30 in the morning, Robert Pape's truck is 20 miles away So then the question becomes, if it's not the Pape truck, then whose truck is it?
When the police in Lyon County ran their records check, that truck came back to our victim, Mr. Graham. It's like, what the heck is going on here?
This just gets more confusing by the moment.
There must be some kind of connection. And also, where are the Papes?
Are they in the house? The fire department says no.
The fire department goes in, puts out the fire, and they make a sweep of the house. So we were basically taking it at their word. And it was myself and the fire marshal who were talking. And we're both kind of like, are we sure we checked the house good?
Fire departments are good at putting out fires. They're not very good at searching places. You train detectives to be thorough and detailed and overlook nothing.
So we did a greater walkthrough of the house.
With a structure fire, the entire house is covered in soot. It's understandable why people overlook things, because it's a mess, filthy mess.
When we did go into the master bedroom, the bed had been stripped. There was a weird substance on the floor, just like squiggles on the carpet. It looked like shampoo. It was really weird. It kind of threw us off. When we got to the walk-in closet, something was just, it was just, they just call it JDL art. It just doesn't look right. Most of their clothes were hung up, but then there's these two huge piles of clothing on the ground, like somebody just emptied out a dresser and just threw it on the floor. Then we started just peeling back some of the clothes. And then all of a sudden it was just like, I think we got a problem.
You find what you've been looking for. 2 dead people. Detective Dave Frankel and Detective Dews of the Lyon County Sheriff's Department find 2 dead bodies, an elderly man and an elderly woman. They confirm the identity of these 2 people, and they are, in fact, Robert and Dorothy Pape.
We have 3 bodies. The Papes are dead. Mr. Graham is dead. What is going on?
In Lyon County, we're all deputy coroners in the sheriff's office. So we were like, okay, we need to start switching over to coroner mode and crime scene mode.
Mrs. Pape had been shot in the head, and Mr. Pape had been shot in the head and torso.
Small caliber bullets, just like Alisher Graham. Now we know this is connected, and the same shooter is involved in all of this mess. There is some evidence of decomposition, which says this didn't happen this morning, this happened a few days ago, and so they are first. Mr. Graham is victim number 2. What is the purpose behind that? Detectives continue their search, and they find 2 locations, the obvious spots where these people were killed.
More than likely, Dorothy's laying in bed, and Robert Pape's laying flat on his back on the floor.
So somebody moved those bodies post-mortem. Now, why did they do that?
The Pape's house appeared to be like a ransacked residence. Jewelry seemed to be gone. Other things that would lead them to believe this might have been a burglary gone bad.
To have this kind of violence associated with theft and burglary is very rare.
We did a greater walkthrough of the house. Now I start seeing indications that are throwing me off. There's a full cookie sheet of freshly cooked bacon. It's just sitting on the counter.
They find half-eaten food. You have a guy who kills and then decides to live there with his victims because they're decomposing 2 or 3 days worth. He's eating a pizza with dead people.
Extremely creepy. Extremely.
And while they're working this scene, the relatives of Dorothy and Robert Pape arrive, and they inform him of their death.
I go screaming up the driveway in my car, and I jump out, and this guy in a suit comes running up to me. I asked him, "You're a fire detective or something?" And he goes, "No, I'm a homicide detective." He puts his hands on my shoulder like this, and he's holding me, and he goes, "We believe that they've been murdered." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean they've been murdered?"
They asked who they might have known that would have done this.
They'd said a lot of people know the Papes, and nobody had a bad word to say about him.
Murder never, ever crossed my mind because everybody in that town loved him. This is Bob and Dottie's 50th wedding anniversary. They celebrated just the two of them because in their minds, that's all there was. You never saw one without the other. Bob and Dottie were married 63 years. Bob was in the U.S. Army, and he was in Korea for 2 years, and he had a Purple Heart. And then Bob's career was in the Drywall Tapers Union. Dottie was a stay-at-home mom. She had like 5 miscarriages trying to have children. And so Bob and Dottie pretty much gave up on ever having any children. And then she got pregnant with my husband. We were, the 4 of us, a very close family.
With the Papes being deceased in Lyon County and Mr. Graham being deceased in our county, and the coincidences of their vehicles being at opposite scenes, obviously we're thinking there's some kind of connection.
They asked, did your mother or your father know a man named Lt.Joe Graham who worked in a gas station 20 miles away on I-80?
And I went, absolutely not.
So it certainly gives one the impression so far that these victims were connected at random.
It puts a lot of pressure on you because obviously your body count's going up quickly. Is somebody going on a killing spree? Do we have a serial murderer? Are we going to find more bodies?
Your assumption is great that this person isn't through killing. He likes it. And wherever he happens to be is where he might strike again. And we don't know where that is. Now it's 11 a.m. Both agencies have been placed on high alert. The Lyon County Sheriff's Department gets a phone call to check the welfare on Angie Duff. This is a neighbor of the Papes. Detective Dews can see that house from where he's standing.
They said the female that owned the house would volunteer at the senior center, and she was a no-call, no-show that morning. We sent 2 street deputies. Well, they get there and there's no answer. One of them went around back. And the back glass had been shattered, and there's glass everywhere.
He's looking through that window and sees the absolute worst thing he could see. The fear was he would strike again, and he has. It's a little after 11 a.m. on the same day, and they discover 2 more dead bodies, a man and a woman.
All of a sudden, that's 5. Our body count's going up.
There's no longer any doubt. This is one person. They're on a killing spree. Anyone they encounter, they're going to kill.
That's when the pressure ratchets up pretty high.
When they gain entry to the home of Angie Duff, they examine the house.
It's a chaotic crime scene. Actually, it was more like a combat zone. She was fighting for her life. There's blood everywhere. It's all over the carpets, it's on the floors, it's on the walls. I can honestly say it's the most bloody non-suicide I've ever seen.
The victims are identified as Angie Duff and her companion, Lester Lieber. Both have been shot to death with small caliber bullets.
Lester also had a very evident knife cut into his chest.
Now we have two weapons involved, perpetrated by the same person. Maybe we're now really enjoying the violence, hard to say. But it's an escalation.
So now what's the motive? Nothing is taken, nothing's rattled through, the cars are still here. And I have had a serious fight in this house with firearms and a bladed weapon. It's like it's calculated, but it's random at the same time.
So they're looking at these bodies, and then they realize the blood is very fresh. This just happened.
If they got far, they're on foot, right in the general area.
Where is this son of a... He's here somewhere.
So now we have to lock down that neighborhood and keep track of who's going in and out, because the killer might be right next to us and us not even know it.
We brought in the SWAT team, and then they searched as far as they could in every direction. We have other deputies doing house to house, knocking on doors.
It's quite a chaotic scene in a way, of a lot of moving parts.
This is absolutely every officer with a badge and a gun that they can get their hands on. We already have 5 people killed. We could have 20 dead before this is over. We gotta make it stop. And the way to make it stop is to find him.
In a small town, word gets around very quickly. So there was a lot of news media around. The people of Fernley are terrified.
You know your neighborhoods better than we do. Be our eyes and ears. Call us.
Nobody knows what's going on. People were wondering, is he going from house to house? Why is he doing this? Who is he targeting?
A lion that is on the hunt, and they are the prey. That's pressure. An hour passes. It is the longest hour in history for that neighborhood. The urgency is incredible. They feel it in their chest. Their heart's in hammer mode at the moment.
And all of a sudden received another call of a possible burglary.
They rush over a few houses down and they talk to the homeowner. He said, I hear somebody crawling around in a crawl space under my house. He is probably able to see them from under that house, and he has a gun. That's a very awkward feeling. You begin to feel very naked indeed.
The SWAT team was called so they could do the search.
So SWAT dives into that house, and they find nothing.
But they did locate a phone and a large amount of cash.
Maybe he was here, but he's not here now. So where did he go? When you know that your shooter is nearby, your head is on a swivel, your gun is in your hand, the safety is off, you're prepared to defend yourself. And you better be, because he's prepared to kill you. So they're looking around, and all of a sudden they hear somebody yell, there he is.
And all of a sudden he comes like through the garage, and he's got a pair of jean shorts on, he's covered in blood. The SWAT team comes around the corner, sees him, and then just swarmed in on him, puts him at gunpoint, orders him onto the ground, and got him in cuffs.
You assume he has a gun on his person. But they search him, and there's no gun.
He's holding both key fobs for both the cars at Angie Duff's house.
He identifies himself as Jeremiah Bean. Okay, Jeremiah, it's time to talk to this boy and find out what his maladjustment is.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
To kill somebody.
It's euphoric when you finally find the animal and you lock him up. And he suddenly doesn't look like he's 12 feet tall. He just looks like what he is, an idiot.
Once you get this person in custody, it's almost a relief. And now it's piecing together how this all happened.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
And are you willing to answer some questions at this time?
Yeah.
He says he wants to talk. Like, I want to tell my story.
All right, what do you need to tell us?
I don't want to say that I'm crazy, but I just wanted to plead criminally insane. I'm just, just hearing stuff. The voice will tell me to do this and do that.
Mr. Bean decides he's going to do an absolutely pathetic third-grade level impersonation of a schizophrenic. He's acting as if he's speaking to voices coming out of his own head. What he's getting is an F from his acting instructor because it's just pathetic.
So what kind of things were these voices saying?
They're just saying to kill somebody.
To kill someone? Okay.
Yeah.
They see through his smokescreen in a microsecond.
Hey, Jeremiah, take your time on this, okay?
And eventually Jeremiah realizes that his shtick isn't working, and he starts to break down.
I just got tired of life, and I just ended up, doing some foul stuff.
He just literally painted the story from the first time that he sought the papes and decided that he was going to rob them to the point where he was in the holding cell.
He says he was staying with a friend in the area of the Pape's home. He's a heroin addict. He's desperate for money.
He had been watching the Papes and kind of looked at them as an easy target. That's why he chose to victimize them.
The garage door was open, and I walked in, and then I just went into the bedroom. And then I shot the lady first in the back of the head. I think she was sleeping.
Her husband rushed to her aid and suffered the same fate.
He came back into the bedroom, and then I shot the old man in the front of the head.
Then he ransacked their home, took their property of value, and stayed there for a day or two.
Then what happened?
I took the trunk, and then I took off.
He went to Reno and pawned some things, got some money, went to a strip club.
He was using the Papes as his own personal ATM.
And then he came back to Fernley, right back to the Papes' house.
They were smelling pretty bad, so I just kind of like covered them with clothes or whatever.
Okay. Were they in the same spots or what?
They were in the closet.
How did they get there?
Oh, I put them there.
And he said that he then took bottles of shampoo and squeezed them onto the carpet, hoping that that would mask the scent.
And then Sunday came around, I was just like, I'm gonna take this truck again, and I'm gonna just try to have some fun or whatever. I left out to go to Reno.
He drives it onto I-80 and heads west.
Okay, so what happened?
So I was trying to make a U-turn off of the freeway out in Sparks. The truck got stuck in a ditch.
He's within a quarter mile of the gas station where Graham works. Graham sees him off the road in this truck.
Okay, so how did you get him to stop?
I just waved. I was like, hey, excuse me. And then I just went blank. Then I shot him.
Was he still inside the car? Was he outside?
He was still inside the car. And I tried to scoot him over or whatever, but then he kind of like just fell out.
He grabbed his pants to try to move when they came down. He grabbed his shirt to drag him, and all it did was pull up. That's why he's almost naked. So now he jumps in Graham's truck.
But instead of getting back on I-80 heading westbound, for some reason, he went back to Fernley, right back to the Pape's house.
Then he realizes he's got another thing he has to cover up.
And then I set the truck on fire. I poured a gas can all over the truck. The matches were actually in the guy's truck. And then I ran.
He decided he was going to hide all of his crimes by starting a fire and then hopefully escape and disappear, which didn't go exactly as he planned.
I was just like, I don't know what to do. So I went a couple of houses up, and I just opened the door, and I went into the house.
The home of Angie Duff.
He said he wasn't there to rob the house. He was there to simply garner a vehicle.
And then what happened?
The lady came out of the bedroom, and she was just like, where are you? And then that's when I shot. And it missed.
Angie goes into fight or flight. But she picks fight, and so she begins to tussle with him a little bit. And he says that there's a struggle over the gun, and he gets her pushed back, and she kind of slumps, and then he drops the gun and he shoots her.
Then what happened?
Her husband came from the backyard.
Lester, who is in the backyard watching the Pape's house burn, comes back in the house. And Bean said that, basically he caught him off guard, firing at him, hitting him and missing him, blowing up the sliding glass door. They get into a small scuffle, but it wasn't much. He said Lester went down pretty fast. And then he grabbed a knife and started stabbing him.
Now he is covered in blood.
Then what happened?
I started to get undressed or whatever. And then I just left to hide.
And here come the police. Oh, no. Now he's trapped.
Thank you for telling me these things. It can't be easy.
You could see when he was done talking, his whole body just relaxed. He'd got it all off his chest.
After the confession is complete, they recovered a .22 caliber pistol, the ultimate corroborating evidence. He is toast, as we say in the murder biz.
The person of interest or suspect in 5 murder cases made his first court appearance just minutes ago.
So we're all waiting in the courtroom. He comes in with his attorney and stands up and pleads not guilty. It was really mind-boggling to everybody because he confessed right away that he did it. So he goes into trial.
The evidence going to trial is overwhelming. Jeremiah Bean is convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. They say the death penalty is revenge. They're right. It is. Time for you to say goodnight, Jeremiah.
Death is permanent, and he didn't care. He killed 5 innocent people that he didn't even know. People that had families, people that had kids and grandkids, and didn't think twice about it.
What I learned from this case is keep an open mind because anything can happen. And as much as I like to look at the good in people, there are wolves among us that will do terrible things.
The last time I was out here to tend to Ellie's cross was about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. It just is a reminder that he's not forgotten.
the sickest part about the whole thing, if that slimy son of a had gone over to Bob and said, hey man, I need to make a couple of bucks, he would have hired him to help him pull weeds or do whatever. But what does he do? He kills them. Angry is what it makes me. How dare you? It makes me want to take a hammer to his head.
When people say there's good in everyone, this is the reason why that's not true. There's no good in Mr. Bean. What mercy do we owe him? None.
Human beings are strange creatures. They perish for the most pathetic reasons you can imagine, and sometimes the people sworn to protect the truth are the ones most eager to bury it. I have spent a lifetime looking at the faces of the dead, and I tell you, every one of them has a story that refuses to stay silent. You think you know how a life ends? You think a label like overdose is enough to close the book? My, you have to be kidding me. Let's talk about Spencer Irwin, a 30-year-old man found in the dirt of a loading dock, stripped of his dignity and his clothes, left like a discarded piece of trash in the city of Fresno. The police arrived, took one look at the scene, and decided they had seen enough. They called it an overdose. They called it a closed case. They did not even bother with an autopsy. You have to be kidding me. You are talking about a human life, a son, and they treated it like paperwork to be filed and forgotten. It is an insult to the badge and an insult to the truth. The victim was a man who knew his own demons. He struggled with alcohol, yes, but he was a man who tried. He had a mother, Kelly, who possessed the one thing the authorities lacked, a spine. She knew her son. She knew he was not a man who lived his life in the shadows of drug dens. When the system tried to gaslight her, when they told her to accept a narrative that did not fit the facts, she did what a detective should have done from the very first minute. She hunted for the truth. Think about the sheer incompetence here. You find a man naked in the dirt, and you see what they call a snow angel pattern in the dust around his head and arms. They claimed it was a symptom of a desperate drug death. But as any seasoned investigator will tell you, nature is not that symmetrical. Nature is messy. That pattern was too perfect, too deliberate, and it screamed of a scene that had been staged by someone who did not understand the gravity of what they were doing. The arrogance of the criminal is only matched by the laziness of the investigator. Then there is the internal battle of the victim. Spencer was a man who reached out to help the broken, those lost in the cycle of homelessness, because he understood the weight of despair. He was a man with a gentle spirit, and yet he was caught in a trap of wrong place and wrong time. Contrast that with the shadows in his life, a man named Angel, a man living in his apartment when he should have been in rehab, a man who ghosted questions when the heat turned up, a white Kia Soul appearing on camera at 10 o'clock at night, turning off its lights like a thief in the night. You do not do that if you have nothing to hide. I look at the photos that the police refuse to properly analyze. I see that line under his jaw, that mark that could be a fold of skin, or the final, cold signature of a struggle. A forensic pathologist worth their salt would tell you that you cannot rule out a homicide without taking a look inside. You simply cannot. The authorities in Fresno took the path of least resistance. They saw a man who had struggled with alcohol, and they decided that was his fate. They did not look for the truth, because the truth requires work. And work is something some people try to avoid at all costs. It is a tragedy, not just because a young man died, but because his death was treated as inevitable. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when the people in charge decide that one life is worth less than another. Every time a detective decides to stop looking, a piece of justice dies with them. I tell you, this was not a natural end. This was a mystery that was begging to be solved, and it was shoved into a drawer. Kelly Irwin did not just lose her son. She had to fight a war against apathy just to be heard. And that, in my book, is the greatest crime of all. People are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for a reason so pathetic so utterly minuscule that it defies logic. You look at a case like this, and you think to yourself, my, how much is a human life worth? Apparently, in the minds of some, it is worth nothing more than a bag of white powder and a few desperate lies. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of men who think they are clever, only to find that they are just children playing a dangerous game they do not understand. You have to be kidding me. Let's look at the facts, cold and hard. Christopher Cole Thomas, a young man with a life ahead of him, finds himself in the wrong place with the wrong people. He is not a criminal. He is an apprentice, a kid trying to find his way, a son who loved his family. Then you have the others, Julian Valles Jr. and Jeremy Carpenter. They claim their friend just panicked, jumped out of a vehicle, and vanished into the night like a ghost. They tell this story to the police at 3 a.m. like it is a grocery list. No panic, no tears, just a rehearsed script. I tell you, when a story sounds like a movie plot, it is because it is a work of fiction. The human mind is a fragile thing, but a guilty conscience is a wrecking ball. When the police finally dig, the truth starts to unravel. They were not passing through for a holiday. They were there to buy methamphetamine. The desperation in their actions, the changing stories, the burner phones, the claims of prayer while a man disappears. It reeks of a cover-up. They treat Cole not as a human being, but as a liability. Imagine the terror of that young man, realizing his so-called companions are not his friends, but people who view him as a loose end. He was smart. He could speak a bit Spanish. He picked up on the danger. That is the tragedy. He was a thinker in a room full of people who only understood the language of violence and deceit. Then you have the others who drift into this nightmare. Rudy and this character they call Gordo. The web gets wider. The lies get thicker. They treat the investigation like a shell game. They move the phones. They throw the drugs. They play their little games with the truth. But data does not lie. The digital breadcrumbs tell a story that their tongues refuse to utter. They moved together. They communicated. They coordinated. They had a plan, and when that plan went sideways, they acted like predators protecting their own skin. It is a sickening dance. The parents, Chris and Kathy, they do the work the world should have done for them. They show more dignity in their grief than these people ever showed in their lives. They offer money. They offer a chance for redemption. They drag the truth into the light, and still, these cowards remain silent. They fear their accomplices more than they fear the truth. They bury themselves in their own secrets, waiting for the day the clock runs out. What is left? A missing boy and a trail of cold, hard facts. You can lie to a detective. You can lie to a grand jury. But you cannot lie to the shadows that follow you. Someone knows. Someone remembers the sound of a door, the look in a pair of eyes, the place where they decided to throw away a human soul. They think they had gotten away with it, but justice is a patient hunter. It does not sleep, and it does not forget, and one day, the truth will come out, not because of a confession, but because the evidence is a weight that eventually pulls even the deepest secret to the surface. It is a pathetic, miserable ending for a bright life. And I tell you, those who know the truth will carry it like a brand until the day they die. Human beings are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could ever imagine, and then they leave behind a trail of breadcrumbs, so confusing that even the devil himself would struggle to make sense of path. You look at a case like the Jameson family, and you tell yourself, my, there has to be a logical explanation. But then you peel back the layers, the off-grid living, the claims of spirits, the piles of cash, and you realize that sometimes the truth is buried under so much human dysfunction that it simply stops making sense. I tell you, it is a sad state of affairs when a family looking for a fresh start ends up as nothing more than a cautionary tale on a remote mountain. They were chasing a dream, a shipping container in the wilderness, a quiet life, a departure from the noise of the modern world. But dreams have a funny way of curdling when they are built on a foundation of chemical dependency, and, if you believe the reports, a descent into something far more irrational. You have a mother, Sherilyn, struggling with her own mind, trapped in a cycle of medication and misery, and a father, Bobby, who seems to have been dragged into the same dark whirlpool. You have to be kidding me if you think that environment was ever going to lead to anything but a catastrophe. When I look at the facts of that day in October, the inconsistencies are enough to turn your hair white. You find a truck locked tight with the keys still in the ignition. That is not a sign of a struggle. That is a sign of a departure that was either forced or utterly, bafflingly unplanned. And the dog, poor, starving little thing, left to wither away in that metal box. That is not something a parent does. That is something a person who has completely lost their grip on reality, or someone who was interrupted by a predator, would do. The letter, that scathing, hateful document found in the truck. You read that, and you see the internal rot of marriage that had clearly crossed the point of no return. You see the accusation of attempted murder, the talk of demons, the absolute vitriol. It reads like a final scream into the void. Some people want to pin it on a murder-suicide, pointing to Sherilyn's history and her erratic behavior. But the logistics simply do not hold up. You do not leave the money, you do not leave the keys, and you do not walk miles into rugged, unforgiving terrain with a child just to vanish into thin air. That does not fit the profile of a premeditated act. That fits the profile of a situation where someone else arrived on the scene and decided their fate. For them, then you have the local element, the people living off the grid, the men like Dan Clemens. You look at his history, or the history of man with his name, and it makes your skin crawl. Voluntary manslaughter? A man found shot to death in California? It makes you wonder what kind of secrets that mountain is holding. They say follow the money, and that is exactly what I would do. That $32,000 was a siren song in an area where people were scraping by in the mud. It is entirely possible that this family stumbled into a nest of vipers. People who saw an easy mark, a family lost in their own problems, and took advantage of the isolation to commit a crime that they knew they would get away with because no one was watching. The tragedy of it all is the little girl, Madison. She never stood a chance in that equation. Whether it was the demons in her parents' heads or the very real monsters walking that mountain, her life was cut short by the absolute worst of human nature. The fact that the remains were found years later, miles from the vehicle, only proves that they did not go there to die on their own terms. They were moved, they were hidden, and they were forgotten by a system that finds it far too easy to label a case as undetermined when the work of finding justice gets too difficult. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of killers, and I have seen the same thing every time: an utter disregard for the sanctity of a human life. It is cold, it is calculated, and it is entirely pathetic. Somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened on that mountain. They know why that truck was left, they know who took the money, and they know the last moments of that family. They're living their lives, perhaps thinking they got away with it. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even if it takes years. Even if it takes a hunter stumbling upon a skull in the brush. You can bury the bodies, you can bury the evidence, but you cannot bury the fact that a crime was committed, and justice, no matter how delayed, is a debt that the universe eventually collects. If you have any information regarding this case, please do not stay silent. The Latimer County Sheriff's Office is the point of contact. Justice for the Jamison family is long overdue. Is there a specific element of the criminal investigation or a particular theory regarding the mountain residents that you would like me to analyze further? My. You see, the thing about human beings is that they are the only creatures on this earth who will lie to themselves even when the truth is screaming directly in their faces. You look at a case like this, and you want to find a reason. You want a motive. You want some grand, cinematic explanation for why a man would reach out and snuff out a life that had barely begun. But there's no grand design here. There's only a void, a dark, empty space where a human soul should have been. I tell you, The cowardice of David Meyerhofer is enough to make a man lose his faith in everything. He lived a life of quiet deception, moving to the world like a shadow, keeping his secrets in a freezer, while pretending to be the helpful local, the man next door. You have to be kidding me. A man who spends his time building things as a carpenter, yet spends his nights dismantling the lives of children. It is a perversion of nature. Think about the victims. Little Susie Yeager, 12 years old, just trying to sleep in a tent, dreaming of mountain air, only to have that peace shattered by a man who saw her not as a person, but as a prize to be collected and discarded. She was a child, and she deserved the safety of her family. Yet she was stolen away by a creature who feared nothing more than being caught. And that mother, Marietta, my heart aches for her. She walked through a valley of shadows for years, holding onto a tape recorder, waiting for a call that was really just a performance by a monster. She clung to the hope that her daughter was alive because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. And that is a kind of agony that words cannot fully capture. When you analyze a predator like Meyerhofer, you see the classic hallmarks. He was a collector of souvenirs. He kept those items, the blouse, the lipstick, the necklace, because he needed to hold on to the power he had stolen. He was a man who felt so small in the real world that he had to invent a world where he was the one in control, the one who held the keys to life and death. He tried to insert himself into the investigation, which is a hallmark of an arrogant mind. He thought he was smarter than the badge. He thought he could outrun the truth. But the truth is a stubborn thing. It does not go away just because you bury it in an outhouse or burn it in a pile of ash. What strikes me most is the total disconnect between his actions and his reality. He confessed to crimes that had been haunting the community for years, yet he denied the ones that would have made him a monster in his own eyes. He had a list, a literal list of camps and targets. That is not the work of a man acting on impulse. That is the work of a man who has made evil his career. And yet he died in a jail cell, taking his final secrets with him. He robbed the families of their final answers, just like he robbed the victims of their futures. People always ask me, how do you handle it? How do you look at the evidence and not lose your mind? You have to keep a cold, clinical distance. You have to view the crime as a puzzle, a series of cold, hard facts that eventually point to a single point of failure. But beneath that, you never, ever forget who you are working for. You work for the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. You work for the ones who have been silenced. Meyerhofer thought he could win, but he lost the only game that mattered. He lost the ability to be remembered as anything other than a pathetic, murderous stain on the landscape of Montana. That is his legacy, and that is all he gets. Nguyen and Hong Lee serves as a testament to the lives of many immigrants who enrich society with their dedication and spirit. This investigation concludes as a somber chapter, emphasizing that even in the darkest circumstances, the commitment of law enforcement and the light of truth can eventually bring justice to those who were silenced. The quiet suburban landscape of Arlington, Texas, often mirrors the aspirations of those who arrive seeking a new beginning, a place where pursuit of a better life is woven into the very fabric of the community. Yet, on a morning in June 2012, that sense of security was shattered, leaving an entire neighborhood and a veteran police force struggling to comprehend the depths of a calculated and tragic betrayal. It began at 7:29 in the morning, when emergency dispatchers received a call from a 38-year-old immigrant from Vietnam who sought a welfare check on his elderly parents-in-law. The family, overcome by a growing sense of dread after failing to reach the couple and witnessing signs of disturbance at their home, waited outside as law enforcement arrived. What the responding officers discovered inside the residence was far from a routine check. It was a scene of profound violence that would haunt those involved for years to come. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, a couple who had immigrated to the United States in the year 2000, had arrived with dreams of stability, working diligently to build a future for their 3 children. They were known for their kindness, their hard work, and their deep ties to the vibrant immigrant community in Tarrant County. They had built a modest commercial sewing business, hoping to leave a legacy for their grandchildren. However, the path to the American dream is often fraught with unseen challenges. When their business faced setbacks, including the loss of a major contract, the couple, driven by a deep-seated respect for the traditions of their homeland, turned to spiritual counsel in hopes of reversing their fortunes. In the complex tapestry of cultural belief, they sought help from a woman in Houston who advertised herself as a spiritual advisor capable of lifting curses and attracting prosperity. They entrusted their financial future to her, pouring vast sums of money into rituals that they believed would protect them. The debt they incurred ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000, a sum that created a suffocating trap. Instead of salvation, they found themselves ensnared in a web of greed and manipulation orchestrated by the very person they had trusted to save them. Investigators initially approached the crime scene with caution, faced with what appeared to be a burglary gone wrong. There were remnants of a stage scene, a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle, scattered items, and signs of disarray intended to point toward gang activity. However, the seasoned homicide detectives, who had spent over 20 years in the field, sensed that the crime was far too personal and meticulously set up. As they delved deeper, the reality of the situation emerged. This was not a random act of violence, but an inside job, a cold-blooded contract, killing aimed at collecting on substantial life insurance policies. The case remained cold for 3 years, a painful period for a family seeking answers, until a breakthrough occurred in 2015. A DNA sample recovered from a cigarette, but at the scene was matched through the National Combined DNA Index System after a young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for a separate felony. This discovery cracked the case wide open. Willie Guillory, only 16 years old at the time of the murders, confessed to his involvement, revealing that he had been acting under the direction of his uncle, Bobby Guillory, and that the entire plot had been orchestrated by the spiritual advisor, Daphne Wright. The investigation revealed a harrowing story of coercion and exploitation. Daphne Wright, acting as a predator who manipulated the financial and spiritual vulnerabilities of the couple, had provided the keys to their home and directed the attack. Even more chilling was the realization that the son-in-law, who had initially reported the crime, had been deeply entangled in the financial pressures surrounding the spiritual advisor, raising disturbing questions about the layers of complicity involved. During the trial, the testimony presented a grim picture of human nature distorted by avarice. The prosecution portrayed Daphne Wright as a manipulative figure who viewed the lives of the elderly couple as nothing more than a means to settle a debt. Despite her attempts to maintain a facade of respectability, the evidence gathered, including financial ledgers detailing her exorbitant fees, painted a clear picture of her role in the tragedy. In September of 2019, the jury returned a verdict of guilty, convicting Daphne Wright of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the legal chapter of this story has concluded, the impact on the community and the family remains profound. It serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of the human condition and the dangers that arise when vulnerability is exploited for gain. The resilience of the community in Arlington, which stood by the family in the aftermath, highlights the importance of solidarity and the enduring belief that, eventually, the truth will come to light. In the face of such senseless loss, the memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu persists, not as victims of a brutal act, but as a couple who worked to build a home and a future, whose lives were testament to the hope and determination that defined the immigrant experience. Their story is a call to vigilance, a reflection on the need for community support, and an acknowledgement that justice, though sometimes slow to arrive, is an essential pillar of a civilized society. The quiet suburb of Arlington, Texas, was shaken to its core on a June morning in 2012, when an unthinkable tragedy befell a pillar of the local Vietnamese community. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an elderly couple who had journeyed across the world to build a new life, were found murdered in their own residence. What began as a welfare check for a family concerned about their missing loved ones turned into a harrowing investigation that would eventually reveal a complex web of deception, exploitation, and the tragic intersection of faith and greed. For investigators, the scene was initially bewildering. The home appeared to have been ransacked, and deliberate efforts were made to frame the incident as a gang-related robbery, with items such as a blue bandana and a marijuana cigarette left intentionally at the scene. Yet, for seasoned homicide detectives, the scene felt too orchestrated. They sensed a profound darkness that did not align with the random violence of a simple burglary. As weeks turned into months, the case went cold, leaving a grieving family and a baffled police department searching for answers. The victims, who were well regarded in their neighborhood for their kindness and industrious spirit, had been seeking spiritual solace to protect their struggling sewing business. In their search for hope, they had encountered a Houston-based spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who claimed to have the power to lift curses and invite fortune. Tragically, it was this desperate search for peace that brought them into the orbit of a predator. Investigators would later learn that the couple had accrued a staggering debt, estimated between $250,000 and $280,000, in a futile attempt to save their livelihood through the advisor's rituals. The breakthrough in the case did not come from a traditional lead, but rather from a separate criminal investigation involving a stolen horse. When the DNA of a 16-year-old named Willie Guillory was entered into the national database, following his conviction for that unrelated felony, the link to the murder scene was forged. Willie, who had been coerced by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, into participating in the crime, eventually confessed to his role in the violence. His testimony, along with that of his uncle, painted a chilling picture. The murders were not a robbery gone wrong, but a cold-blooded, contract-style hit orchestrated by Daphne Wright. The motive was as chilling as it was calculated, with a family unable to pay the exorbitant debts owed for her services. Daphne Wright sought to recoup her losses by targeting the life insurance policies of the couple. She manipulated the family's vulnerability, essentially turning their faith against them. The son-in-law, Chow Tran, who was also deeply involved in the desperate search for spiritual guidance, was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against the others. His presence in the case remains a subject of intense public and legal debate, reflecting the complexities of the moral compromises made during the pursuit of justice. The subsequent trial of Daphne Wright brought the gruesome reality of conspiracy to light. Prosecutors portrayed her as a mastermind who exploited the immigrant couple's fear and devotion to their family legacy. In the end, the jury delivered a verdict of guilty for capital murder, sentencing Daphne Wright to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the verdict provided a measure of closure for the community, the loss of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee remains a poignant reminder of the fragility of the American dream when it is preyed upon by those who manipulate the deepest beliefs of others. Their memory continues to be honored by those who knew them, not for the tragedy of their final moments, but for the life of hard work, dedication to family, and enduring spirit that they built in their adopted home. The case stands as a solemn testament to the importance of vigilance and the strength of a community that refuses to let the darkest acts of greed extinguish the light of those they have lost. The search for a better life often leads individuals across oceans and continents, carrying with them the hopes of a generation and the quiet strength of their heritage. Such was the journey of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, a dedicated couple who arrived in the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000 to forge a future for their family. They settled in Arlington, Texas, working diligently to build a garment business and nurturing a dream that centered on the well-being of their children and grandchildren. However, the delicate balance of their existence was shattered in a series of events that would eventually bring to light a dark undercurrent of human greed and betrayal. On the morning of June 10, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, the relative peace of their lives was irrevocably destroyed. When the couple failed to appear for their daily routines, their family, growing increasingly concerned, requested a welfare check. Upon entering the home, law enforcement officers encountered a scene of profound sorrow and violence that would haunt even the most experienced investigators for years to come. The initial scene suggested a robbery, with signs of disarray and staged elements, such as a blue bandana and a cigarette, deliberately left to mimic the activities of local street gangs. Yet, the brutal nature of the crime, the victims having been bound and silenced in their own bedroom, closet, spoke to a far more personal and calculated malice. For 3 years, the investigation into the deaths of the elderly couple stagnated, leaving a community searching for answers and a family grappling with an agonizing silence. The turning point arrived in 2015, not through a breakthrough in the original crime scene evidence, but through the mundane path of another felony, the theft of a horse by a teenager named Willie Guillory. As a result of this conviction, Willie Guillory was required to submit his genetic information to the national database, which eventually provided the link to the evidence recovered from the apartment in 2012. Under police interrogation, the reality of the tragedy began to unfold. Willie Guillory, who was 16 years old at the time of the murders, confessed that he and his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had been recruited to stage a burglary and commit a violent act. The motivation behind this heinous plot was not random violence, but a cold, calculated murder for a higher scheme orchestrated by a figure who preyed upon the couple's deepest vulnerabilities. The perpetrator, Daphne Wright, was a woman who positioned herself as a spiritual advisor to the immigrant community. In a culture that deeply respects tradition and seeks protection through spiritual harmony, the couple had turned to her when their business began to falter. They believed she possessed the power to lift curses and restore their fortune. Instead of offering guidance, Daphne Wright exploited their fears, demanding increasing sums of money until the debt reached an impossible amount, estimated between $250,000 and $280,000. When the money could not be paid, she viewed the couple's life insurance policies as the ultimate means to satisfy her greed. The chilling revelation that this was an inside job involving the very people who were meant to protect the victims served as a stark warning about the dangers of predatory exploitation under the guise of spiritual aid. In the subsequent legal proceedings, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the justice system secured a conviction against the mastermind, the involvement of the son-in-law, Chow Tran, remained a point of deep contention and moral ambiguity, as he was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. The tragedy of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu serves as a somber reflection on the vulnerability of those who, in their search for stability and faith, encounter those who would sacrifice human dignity for material gain. Their legacy remains one of hard work and love, now shadowed by the memory of a betrayal that shook their community to its core, reminding society of the necessity to remain vigilant against the darkness that can hide behind a veneer of benevolence. The pursuit of a quiet, stable life is a universal desire, deeply rooted in the human spirit. It is the quiet hope of building a home, finding harmony within a community, and leaving a legacy of peace for the next generation. For Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an endearing elderly couple who immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, this dream was a cornerstone of their existence. They settled in Arlington, Texas, a city known for its diverse tapestry of cultures, hoping to weave their own thread of hard work and traditional values into the community. Yet, what began as a journey toward prosperity ultimately unraveled into a heartbreaking tragedy, serving as a profound reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. Long and Hong were beloved figures in their neighborhood. They were known as a hard-working, gentle pair who bothered no one and embraced the simple virtues of diligence and family. Upon arriving in Texas, they established a commercial sewing business, working tirelessly to provide for their 3 children and grandchildren. For nearly a decade, their dedication bore fruit, culminating in a lucrative contract with a massive commercial entertainment company. It seemed the balance of life was in their favor. However, the rhythm of commerce is often unforgiving. By the year 2011, they lost their major contract, and their financial stability began to crumble. In times of profound distress, when the orderly structure of life collapses, human vulnerability is laid bare, searching for a beacon of hope. The family strayed from pragmatic solutions and turned toward ancient mysticism. Chow Tran, their son-in-law who served as the English-speaking face of the business, and Hong Li found an advertisement in a local newspaper. It featured a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. This advisor, Daphne Wright, promised the ability to lift curses and restore good fortune. Desperate to save their life's work, the family entrusted their fate and their finances to her. What followed was a tragic exploitation of faith. Rather than finding spiritual healing or practical guidance, the elderly couple was drawn into a spiral of debt. They poured their remaining resources into rituals, eventually owing Daphne Wright an astronomical sum estimated between $250,000 and $280,000. When the couple could no longer pay, the spiritual advisor's facade of benevolence vanished, replaced by a ruthless demand for her money. The morning of June 10, 2012, shattered the peace of the Arlington community. At 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers received a call from a purportedly worried Chow Tran, requesting a welfare check on his in-laws. Responding officers arrived at the apartment to find a scene that would deeply unsettle even the most seasoned veterans of the police force. Inside, they made a grim discovery in a small bedroom closet. Long and Hong had been subjected to fatal violence, their lives taken in a manner that spoke of cold, calculated cruelty. Initial evidence at the scene, including a blue bandana wrapped around a beverage bottle and scattered illicit substances, suggested the tragedy was the result of a sudden gang intrusion or a robbery gone terribly wrong. However, seasoned investigators, some with over 21 years of service, sensed that the narrative presented by the crime scene was deeply flawed. The scene felt artificially constructed, an illusion designed to mislead the pursuit of justice. For 3 long years, the community mourned without answers. The case grew cold, though the dedication of the investigators never wavered. The turning point arrived in October 2015. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had been merely 16 years old at the time of the tragedy, committed a felony offense involving the theft of a horse. This act placed his genetic material into the national database, which ultimately linked him to the remains of a smoking item left at the Arlington apartment. When confronted by authorities on October 17, 2015, the young man broke down. He confessed his presence at the scene, but revealed a much darker, more complex conspiracy. He explained that he had been brought there by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. More shockingly, he revealed that this was not a random act of violence, but a targeted crime ordered by Daphne Wright. The investigation swiftly expanded, uncovering a web of greed that defied all sense of human decency. Bobby Guillory, a man who had no prior criminal record but was suffering from severe financial desperation, confessed that Daphne Wright had promised him $10,000 to carry out the act. Daphne had learned that Long and Hong were the beneficiaries of substantial life insurance policies, and she sought to forcefully extract her perceived debt from the payouts. Yet, the most heartbreaking revelation was still to come. The access to the victim's sanctuary, the very key to their apartment, had been provided by someone within their closest circle. Investigators discovered that Chow Tran, the son-in-law who had initiated the welfare check, was deeply entangled in the plot. Following the loss of his in-laws, Chow had collected an insurance payout of $850,000, purchased a new home, and quietly abandoned the family business. Facing the weight of the investigation, prosecutors made the difficult decision to grant Chow immunity in exchange for his testimony, a necessary measure to ensure the conviction of the primary architect of the crime. In August 2019, the justice system delivered its verdict. Daphne Wright was convicted of her orchestrating role and received a sentence of life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory were also held accountable for their actions. However, the community is left with a lingering sense of sorrow knowing that Chow Tran, shielded by his immunity, remains free despite a profound betrayal of his own family. This story stands as a solemn warning. It reminds us of the paramount importance of maintaining balance and rationality when faced with life's hardships. It is a call to protect the vulnerable among us from charlatans who prey on desperation. While the justice system has addressed the architects of this crime, the true healing for the Arlington community lies in remembering Long Nguyen and Hong Lee Not For, the tragic end they met, but for the peaceful, hard-working lives they lived. Their memory endures as a testament to the quiet strength of those who seek only to build a better life, urging us all to foster communities built on genuine support, honesty, and an unwavering respect for human dignity. The serene quiet of a residential morning in Arlington, Texas, was shattered on the 10th of June, 2012. What began as a routine welfare check would soon unfurl into a harrowing investigation that exposed the fragile boundaries between faith and exploitation and the catastrophic consequences of greed. For the responding officers, the scene that awaited them within the residence was not merely a crime, but a profound violation of the sanctity of the home, a space meant to be a refuge for an elderly couple who had traveled thousands of miles to realize their vision of a secure and dignified life. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, seeking to weave their own tapestry into the fabric of the American dream. Like many who came before them, they brought with them a deep commitment to family, industry, and the preservation of their heritage. They established a commercial sewing business, working with unwavering dedication, eventually securing contracts that spoke to their professional reliability. However, by the year 2011, the winds of fortune had turned. Facing the dissolution of their commercial success and the encroaching shadow of financial uncertainty, the family, deeply rooted in traditions that honor the intersection of spirituality and daily life, sought solace in the guidance of a spiritual advisor. In the pursuit of protection and the restoration of their prosperity, they reached out to a woman in Houston who presented herself as a conduit for spiritual fortune. This advisor, Daphne Wright, purportedly offered the ability to lift curses and ensure the favor of the spiritual realm. Yet, the tragedy that unfolded revealed a chilling reality. The very person entrusted with their spiritual well-being had become the architect of their demise. Investigation would later uncover that the mounting financial pressure, combined with the exorbitant fees charged by this advisor, had created a suffocating debt, eventually estimated to be between $250,000 and $280,000. The discovery of the crime remains etched in the memories of the responding officers. Upon entering the residence, investigators were met with a scene of absolute disarray. A chaotic tableau designed to mislead, the presence of a blue bandana, crushed pills, and discarded marijuana cigarettes were intended to mimic the hallmarks of gang-related activity, a tactical deception designed to cast suspicion upon the local community. For 14 years, the lead investigators had confronted the darker aspect of human nature, yet they described the specific scene as one of the most gruesome and personally rattling experiences of their careers. The victims had been bound and silenced with layers of adhesive tape, a testament to a level of cold, calculated cruelty that stood in stark contrast to their gentle, unassuming lives. For years, the case stagnated, relegated to the category of cold cases. The lack of matchable evidence in the National Genetic Offender Database left investigators with few avenues to pursue. The turning point did not emerge from a sophisticated forensic breakthrough, but from the simple, albeit regrettable, necessity of the justice system. 3 years later, in 2015, the perpetrator of the violent act, who was only 16 years old at the time of the murders, committed a separate felony that required the entry of his genetic profile into the federal database. This administrative act connected the young man, Willie Guillory, to the discarded marijuana cigarette found at the scene, effectively dismantling the illusion of a random gang-related burglary. Under interrogation, the truth began to emerge. The crime was not a random act of violence, but a commission hit orchestrated by Daphne Wright. Willie Guillory and his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had been enlisted to execute the tragedy, driven by the advisor's insatiable demand for the debt to be repaid through life insurance proceeds. The revelation that the orchestrator was the very person the family trusted for protection remains a painful indictment of the misuse of power and spiritual authority. The subsequent trial in 2019 served as a final chapter in this pursuit of justice. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The resonance of this case extends beyond the courtroom. It stands as a somber reflection on the vulnerability of those who, in times of despair, seek answers in the shadows of mysticism, often to the detriment of their own safety. The family of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, left to navigate the aftermath of such a senseless loss, serves as a poignant reminder of the resilience required to endure when the foundations of safety are so violently upended. While the primary orchestrator has been removed from society, the case continues to provoke reflection within the community regarding the accountability of those who wield influence over the vulnerable. Justice, in this instance, was delayed, but it ultimately provided a measure of closure to a tragedy that reminds us all of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and the necessity of truth in an often complex world. The tragic loss of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee in the year 2012 serves as a somber chapter in the history of the Vietnamese community in Arlington, Texas. Arriving in the United States in the year 2000, the couple embodied the spirit of the American dream, establishing a commercial sewing business and integrating themselves into the fabric of the local community. Their lives were defined by their dedication to their family, their work, and their adherence to the cultural traditions of their homeland. However, this pursuit of prosperity and security was met with a calculated betrayal that would eventually shock the region and leave investigators questioning how such a heinous act could be committed against two individuals widely regarded for their kindness and generosity. The investigation began on the morning of June 10, 2012, when a call to emergency dispatchers led to a welfare check at the residence of the couple. The initial discovery by law enforcement was met with profound distress, as seasoned detectives with 21 years of experience encountered a scene of extreme violence that clearly defied the characteristics of a typical burglary. For several years, the case remained shrouded in mystery. Law enforcement officials were initially led down a path of suspicion toward gang activity, fueled by the presence of staged evidence, including a blue bandana and illicit substances that seemed designed to misdirect the investigation. Despite the diligent efforts of the Arlington Police Department, the absence of viable leads forced the case into a cold status for 3 years. The breakthrough in the year 2015 was not the result of a direct lead on the murder itself, but rather the consequence of an unrelated felony. The arrest of 16-year-old Willie Guillory for the theft of a horse in Houston necessitated his inclusion in the criminal database. When the forensic evidence from the original crime scene was reprocessed against this new entry, it provided a definitive DNA match that detectives had sought for years. Under questioning, the younger Guillory confessed, revealing that he had acted at the direction of his uncle, Bobby Guillory. and had been recruited into a plot orchestrated by a woman named Daphne Wright. The investigation revealed that Daphne Wright, who operated as a spiritual advisor, had weaponized the family's cultural beliefs and financial anxieties for her own gain. As the couple's business faced difficulties, they had sought her counsel, believing she possessed the power to remove curses and restore their fortunes. Instead, they were ensnared in a predatory cycle of debt, with the financial obligations reportedly growing to between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family could no longer meet these mounting demands, Wright orchestrated the murders. Viewing the couple's life insurance policies as a means to recoup her purported losses, Wright provided the keys to their apartment, turning their place of sanctuary into the site of a tragic execution. The legal proceedings that followed in the year 2019 underscored the gravity of the betrayal. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while the verdict provided a measure of closure for the community. The resolution of the case remains complex due to the involvement of the victim's son-in-law, Chow Tran, granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against the others. His role and his potential complicity remain a subject of significant ethical debate among those involved in the investigation. Ultimately, the story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee is a warning about the vulnerability of those who, in times of uncertainty, turn to the promise of easy solutions from those who seek only to exploit them. It stands as a testament to the dedication of law enforcement officers who refuse to let the case fade into obscurity, and as a reflection of a community that continues to honor the memory of a couple who worked tirelessly to build a legacy for their children and grandchildren. The pursuit of truth, even when it takes years to surface, remains the bedrock of a just society, and the memory of the victims continues to serve as a reminder of the value of empathy, integrity, and the protection of the innocent. The pursuit of the American dream is often marked by resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring hope of building a better life for one's children. Yet, sometimes this pursuit encounters a darkness that defies understanding, testing the very foundations of a community. In the city of Arlington, in the state of Texas, the lives of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an elderly couple who had emigrated from Vietnam, were tragically extinguished, leaving a profound sense of loss and a chilling mystery that would haunt investigators for years. It was on the morning of the 10th of June in the year 2012 that a welfare check, requested by their son-in-law, led to the discovery of a scene so horrific that even the most seasoned investigators were left shaken. The apartment was found in disarray, and in the bedroom closet, the bodies of the elderly couple were discovered, bound and suffocated with duct tape. For an officer with 14 years of experience, it was the most gruesome scene he had ever encountered. The initial indicators at the scene, including a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle and scattered drug paraphernalia, suggested the handiwork of a local gang, leading police to hypothesize a robbery gone wrong. However, as the investigation deepened, the pieces did not quite fit. The level of violence and the calculated nature of the crime pointed toward a more personal and insidious motive. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee was one of hard work and community ties. Having moved to the United States in the year 2000 to forge a legacy for their family, they established a commercial sewing business. When their good fortune began to wane, they, like many others seeking comfort and guidance in times of uncertainty, turned to the traditions of their homeland. They sought the help of a spiritual advisor from Houston, a woman named Daphne Wright, who promised to lift curses and restore their prosperity. This trust, tragically, would become their undoing. Over time, the family poured a staggering amount of money into these rituals, incurring a debt that climbed to between $250,000 and $280,000. It was revealed that when the couple could no longer pay, the spiritual advisor demanded their lives, viewing them as a means to collect on life insurance policies that would settle the debt. The investigation remained cold for years until the year 2015, when a breakthrough in the case arrived through the arrest of a young man named Willie Guillory, whose deoxyribonucleic acid evidence was finally linked to a marijuana cigarette left at the crime scene. Upon interrogation, the truth began to unravel. Willie Guillory confessed that his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had been recruited by Daphne Wright to execute the couple. The staged crime scene, designed to look like a gang-related robbery, was merely a veil for a cold-blooded murder for hire plot. As investigators peeled back the layers of this deception, they discovered the true nature of Daphne Wright, whom they described as a spiritual loan shark who exploited the desperation and faith of her clients. The trial that followed exposed the depths of her greed, revealing that she had orchestrated the entire event, supplying the key to the apartment and dictating the terms of the tragedy. Chow Tran, the son-in-law of the victims, was also drawn into the complex web of this investigation, eventually receiving immunity in exchange for his testimony against the others. The jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While justice was ultimately served for Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, the case remains a sobering reminder of the vulnerability of the immigrant experience and the catastrophic consequences of greed. It stands as a testament to the persistent nature of truth, which, regardless of how long it remains hidden in the dark, will eventually find its way into the light, ensuring that those responsible for such heinous acts must finally answer for their conduct. The quiet city of Arlington, in the state of Texas, was once the beacon of hope for Long Nguyen and Hong Lee. Arriving from Vietnam in the year 2000, this resilient couple sought to weave their own narrative into the fabric of the United States. They brought with them the values of hard work, family unity, and a deep ancestral respect for tradition. For years, their commercial sewing business thrived, serving as a testament to their dedication and their desire to provide a stable legacy for their children and grandchildren. They were not merely business owners. They were pillars of a growing community, known for their kindness and their commitment to their heritage. However, the unpredictable nature of global trade eventually brought challenges, and the family found themselves navigating a period of financial hardship. In times of profound uncertainty, it is human nature to reach for comfort, and for Long and Hong, this comfort took the form of deeply held cultural beliefs in spiritual guidance. They sought protection, hoping to restore the harmony of their business through traditional mysticism. Tragically, this search for solace made them vulnerable. They crossed paths with Daphne Wright, a woman who positioned herself as a spiritual advisor in Houston, but whose true intentions were far removed from the healing and protection she promised. She exploited their fears, leading them down a path of increasing debt and financial dependence. On the morning of June 10th, 2012, the carefully built life of this couple was shattered in a brutal act of violence. When the police arrived at their residence in Arlington, they were met with a scene that defied all logic and expectation. The seasoned investigators, who had dedicated their lives to protecting the public, found themselves confronted with a tragedy that shook them to their core. What was initially staged to look like a random burglary, complete with misleading symbols and planted evidence, was soon revealed to be a cold-blooded conspiracy orchestrated by those who preyed upon the very people they claimed to help. The investigation into these murders was long and arduous, spanning over 3 years of silence and cold leads. The turning point in this harrowing case came not from conventional policing alone, but from the relentless persistence of investigators who refused to let justice fade into obscurity. A breakthrough occurred when genetic evidence from the crime scene, previously unknown to the system, was finally identified. This led the authorities to Willie Guillory, who was 16 at the time of the crime, and subsequently to his uncle, Bobby Guillory. Pulling back the curtain on the murder for hire plot directed by Daphne Wright, as the truth emerged, it was revealed that financial greed had poisoned the sanctity of spiritual trust. Daphne Wright, having ensnared the family in a cycle of debt that reached hundreds of thousands of dollars, orchestrated the violence with the hope of collecting insurance proceeds. The ensuing legal proceedings brought a heavy, complex truth to light. The trial of Daphne Wright stood as a grim reminder of the dangers of exploitation and the fragility of trust. While she was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the case left an indelible mark on the Arlington community. It serves as a somber reflection on the importance of community vigilance, the necessity of protecting the most vulnerable among us, and the enduring resilience of families who, even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, strive to uphold their dignity and honor. The legacy of Long and Hong remains, a memory of a hard-working couple whose lives were taken, but whose spirit continues to remind us of the precious nature of the bonds that connect us all, even in the face of darkness, reminding us that the light of truth and justice remains the ultimate foundation of a cohesive and caring society. It is a fateful moment when the silence of home, once filled with hope and the pursuit of better life, is shattered by a cruelty that rattles even veteran investigators. In June of the year 2012, the police of Arlington in the state of Texas were confronted with a crime that deeply disturbed the community and transcended human understanding. The couple Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, who had immigrated from Vietnam to the United States of America to provide a future for their children, were torn from life in their own home in a way that left all present teetering on the edge of an abyss. The investigators, who with 21 years of experience in homicide cases should have been hardened, stood in that bedroom where the couple who had once pursued the American dream were found in a harrowing display of violence and could barely maintain their composure. The manner in which the victims had been bound with heavy tape and gagged pointed to a coldness that went far beyond an ordinary robbery. The couple was firmly rooted in their belief in traditional mystical practices, a legacy from their homeland meant to provide support in difficult times. Hoping to avert economic misfortune through spiritual aid, they had turned to an advisor in Houston whose promises of liberation and prosperity formed a fatal trap. What began as a search for protection ended in a web of greed and exploitation, as the debts to the spiritual advisor, named Daphne Wright, reached an amount between $250,000 and $280,000. As the investigators examined the initial traces, they encountered a scene that seemed too perfectly staged to be true. A blue bandana, an empty beer bottle, residues of prohibited substances. All this seemed to point to the activities of local gangs, but to the experienced investigators, it was too obvious, almost a staging to divert the gaze from the true abysses within the closest circle. The path of truth finally led not into the world of gang criminality, but into the complex and dark entanglements of the family itself, where greed, financial desperation, and the fatal trust in a ruthless woman met. The breakthrough came years later when an analysis of genetic material identified the then 16-year-old Willie Guillory, who had been added to the database of criminal offenders after conviction for another offense. His confession opened the door to a painful realization. It was a murder for hire, initiated by Daphne Wright, who shamelessly exploited the trust of a family in need. Bobby Guillory, the uncle of the young man, was also involved and admitted that Daphne Wright had forged a plan to collect the insurance proceeds of the couple. The role of the son-in-law Chow Tran, however, remained a dark shadow over the entire case. Although he received immunity in exchange for his testimony, many investigators felt it was a bitter injustice that he was not held accountable for his complicity. Daphne Wright was finally sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a verdict that established justice in a formal sense, but could not heal the scars as crime left on survivors and the entire community. This case remains a cautionary reminder of how quickly the pursuit of happiness can go astray when desperate people fall for the wrong leaders and when family cohesion is corrupted by the shadow of greed. The resilience of the Vietnamese community in Arlington, which has stood up again despite this trauma, however, underscores an indomitable spirit that seeks light and balance even in the darkest times, always in the hope that the injustice planned in secrecy will eventually step into the light of truth. The tragedy that unfolded in Arlington, Texas, in June of 2012, remains a haunting reminder of how fragile the safety of our homes can be, and how the pursuit of the proverbial American dream can, in the darkest of circumstances, become a vessel for exploitation and betrayal. When the elderly immigrant couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, were discovered murdered within the confines of their own residence, the local community and the veteran law enforcement officers tasked with the investigation were left profoundly shaken. This was not merely a case of a robbery gone wrong, as initial evidence had deceptively suggested, but a meticulously orchestrated act of malice that shattered the lives of a family that had sought only a peaceful future for their children and grandchildren. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee had arrived in the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, carrying with them the traditions and resilience of their homeland. They were figures of stature within their community, having established a commercial sewing business that served as a foundation for their life in Texas. Their 3 children worked alongside them, and for many years the family thrived. However, when economic challenges began to mount and their business prospects dwindled, the couple turned toward a traditional belief system in search of protection and guidance. In their culture, the role of a spiritual advisor is often sought during times of significant crisis, such as the threat of bankruptcy or familial strife. It was in this state of vulnerability that they encountered a woman named Daphne Wright, who claimed to possess the power to lift curses and restore good fortune. The investigation began early on the morning of June 10, 2012, when an emergency dispatcher received a call from the couple's son-in-law, Chow Tran, requesting a welfare check. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, the scene presented itself as a chaotic burglary, with signs of struggle throughout the residence. The officers noted a plate of crushed prescription pills, a marijuana cigarette, and a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle, which initially led them to theorize that the crime was the work of local gangs. Yet, for seasoned homicide detectives, these details seemed too carefully placed, too deliberate. The reality of the scene, the victims discovered in a bedroom closet, bound and suffocated with duct tape, revealed a level of violence that far exceeded the typical patterns of a random robbery. For several years, the case remained cold, with investigators working tirelessly but without a definitive breakthrough. It was not until the year 2015 that the truth began to emerge, triggered by an unrelated felony committed by a young man named Willie Guillory. When his deoxyribonucleic acid profile was entered into the national database following his arrest for an unrelated theft, it provided the missing link to the evidence found at the crime scene. Under questioning, Willie Guillory confessed his role in the murders, revealing that he had been acting under the direction of his uncle, Bobby Guillory, and that the entire operation had been orchestrated by Daphne Wright. The revelation transformed the understanding of the motive. It was not a random act of violence, but a calculated murder for hire. Daphne Wright, having gained the trust of the couple through her role as a spiritual advisor, had leveraged her financial desperation and fear of spiritual misfortune to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the money ceased to flow and the couple could no longer meet her exorbitant demands, she plotted their demise to collect on their life insurance policies. The key to the apartment had been provided by those within the family circle, turning a place of safety into a trap. Bobby Guillory admitted to his participation, and a deeper investigation into Daphne Wright unveiled a ledger of fees detailing her exploitation of vulnerable individuals, charging tens of thousands of dollars for her services. In the subsequent legal proceedings, the role of Chow Tran became a focal point of intense scrutiny. While he was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against the others, his involvement in the events leading up to the deaths remains a subject of profound moral complexity. The jury ultimately found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. This conclusion, while providing a measure of legal justice, leaves an indelible mark on the community. It serves as a somber reflection on the dangers of predatory exploitation and the essential need for vigilance in protecting the vulnerable. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee is not just a chronicle of a crime, but a call to remember the importance of empathy, transparency, and the resilience of community that must remain united in the face of such profound darkness. It was a morning that shattered the quiet dignity of a suburban neighborhood in Arlington, Texas. On June 10, 2012, the tragedy that befell Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an elderly couple who had sought refuge and a new beginning in the United States, sent shockwaves through the community and left even the most seasoned investigators grappling with the visceral horror of the scene. What began as a welfare check requested by their son-in-law, Chow Tran, quickly unraveled into a complex narrative of desperation, exploitation, and ultimate betrayal that would take years to fully comprehend. The couple, who had arrived from Vietnam in the year 2000 to build a legacy for their 3 children, had poured their energy into a commercial sewing business, becoming a fixture of the local Vietnamese community. However, as the harsh economic realities of the modern market began to erode their success, they found themselves drowning in debt and looking for solace in traditions from their homeland. In their search for a way to reverse their dwindling fortunes, they were led to a spiritual advisor in Houston, a woman named Daphne Wright, who claimed to possess the power to remove curses and restore prosperity. This association, rooted in a cultural desire for protection and guidance, would ultimately prove fatal. When the Arlington police arrived at the residence on that morning in June, they were met with a scene that defied the typical patterns of a routine welfare check. The apartment, once a sanctuary for a hard-working family, was found in disarray, and the couple was discovered in a bedroom closet, bound in silence in a manner that suggested a calculated, cold-blooded act. Investigators initially theorized that the crime was a robbery gone wrong or the work of local gang activity, a hypothesis fueled by the presence of a blue bandana left at the scene, which appeared to be a deliberate attempt to stage a gang-related incident. Yet, for veteran officers with 21 years of experience, the perfection of the crime scene felt unnatural. It was too staged, too clean, and lacked the chaotic hallmarks of a random street crime. For 2 years, the investigation remained stalled, with no breakthroughs and no leads, leaving the family in a state of suspended grief and the community in a state of unease. The turning point did not come from a traditional police tip, but from a separate legal transgression. In 2015, a DNA match was recovered from a piece of evidence left at the scene, linked to a man named Willie Guillory, who had recently been processed into the state database following an arrest for stealing a horse. At the time of the murders, Willie was only 16 years old and lacked a criminal record, which had kept him invisible to the system. Once he was brought in for questioning, the facade of a random robbery crumbled. Willie confessed that the crime had been orchestrated by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, and that the driving force behind the murder was Daphne Wright. The truth was far more disturbing than any gang theory. It was a murder-for-hire plot designed to collect on life insurance policies. Daphne Wright had allegedly turned the couple's financial desperation against them, leveraging their debt and their belief in her spiritual powers to manipulate them into a situation where she could profit from their deaths. The investigation revealed a chilling dynamic of financial abuse disguised as spiritual guidance. As the sewing business struggled, the couple had fallen into a deep debt with Daphne, eventually owing somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000 when they could no longer pay. Daphne allegedly sought to recoup her losses by targeting the couple's life insurance policies. The subsequent legal proceedings exposed the dark reality behind what had been presented as a simple burglary. In 2019, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While justice was served in the courtroom, The case left lingering questions regarding the involvement of the son-in-law, Chow Tran, who was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. The resolution of this case serves as a somber reminder of the vulnerabilities that can arise when trust is misplaced and when the desperate search for hope is exploited by those with malicious intent. The legacy of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, whose lives were defined by their dedication to their family and their work, remains a testament to the resilience of the immigrant experience, even in the face of such an incomprehensible and tragic end. In the quiet morning of the 10th of June, in the year 2012, the city of Arlington, Texas, was shattered by the discovery of a crime that would leave even the most seasoned investigators reeling when authorities were summoned to a residence to conduct a welfare check. They expected a routine matter, yet what awaited them behind the closed doors of a master bedroom was a scene of profound sorrow and unthinkable violence. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, an elderly couple who had built a life of dignity and hard work after immigrating from Vietnam, were found brutally murdered, their lives taken in an act that would eventually reveal a complex, harrowing narrative of exploitation and tragedy. The investigators who first arrived on the scene were confronted with a tableau that initially seemed to mirror the hallmarks of a desperate, botched robbery or the work of local gangs. The apartment appeared in total disarray, with signs of a struggle evident across the living space. And curious items like a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle were left behind, seemingly intended to lead the police to a particular, albeit incorrect, conclusion. For years, this case haunted the local law enforcement, becoming a cold case that offered no clear path toward justice. The victims, beloved by their family and active in their community, were remembered as industrious individuals who had sought a peaceful existence in their adopted country, pursuing the classic vision of a secure future for their children and grandchildren. As the years passed, the investigators never abandoned their search for the truth, eventually relying on advancements in forensic science to break the silence of the crime scene. A breakthrough arrived when a DNA profile, obtained from evidence left at the scene, was matched to a young man named Willie Guillory. At the time of the murders, he had been only 16 years old, a minor whose genetic profile had not yet entered the national database. His eventual arrest, prompted by an unrelated felony conviction, unspooled the entire web of conspiracy that had led to the deaths of the couple. Willie Guillory confessed to his involvement, detailing a plan that had been orchestrated not by local street gangs, but by a person the couple had trusted as a spiritual guide. The investigation uncovered a dark reality of human vulnerability. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, like many who navigate the complex transition between cultures, had sought comfort and solutions in traditions from their homeland. When their commercial sewing business faced hardship, they reached out to a woman in Houston who advertised herself as a spiritual advisor capable of lifting curses and ensuring prosperity. This individual, Daphne Wright, gained the couple's trust, but instead of offering solace, she systematically ensnared them in a cycle of debt. As the business struggled, the financial burden placed upon the couple grew to a staggering amount, between $250,000 and $280,000. The revelation that this was an inside job, a murder-for-hire plot designed to collect on life insurance policies, was devastating to the family and the investigators alike. Bobby Guillory, the uncle of Willie Guillory, was identified as the accomplice who had carried out the plan under the direction of Daphne Wright. The betrayal went deeper. As allegations surfaced regarding complicity of the victim's own son-in-law, Chow Tran, who was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, the trial that followed in the year 2019 painted a portrait of a woman who wielded psychological and spiritual control over her clients, using their fears and their desperation to her advantage. The jury ultimately convicted Daphne Wright of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While the verdict brought a formal conclusion to the legal proceedings, The emotional residue of such an event remains a heavy burden for the surviving family and the community that knew the victims. The tragedy serves as a solemn reminder of the dangers that can arise when isolation meets exploitation, and the importance of vigilance within our societies to protect those who might be vulnerable to such predatory schemes. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, in their pursuit of a quiet, prosperous life, ultimately became victims of a greed that transcended boundaries of belief, leaving behind a legacy that continues to underscore the need for compassion, transparency, and justice for all members of the community. The tragedy that unfolded in the suburban landscape of Arlington, Texas, serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly the pursuit of a better life can be marred by the shadows of human greed and manipulation. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, an elderly couple who emigrated from Vietnam to the United States in the year 2000 to build a legacy for their children and grandchildren, were individuals defined by their resilience, hard work, and deep-seated faith. Their journey, which saw them establish a commercial sewing business and integrate into the vibrant tapestry of the Texan community, came to a devastating and premature end in June of the year 2012. The events that transpired at their residence not only claimed 2 lives, but also revealed a disturbing web of deception orchestrated by those they trusted for spiritual guidance. When the emergency dispatchers received the initial call on the morning of June 10th, the investigation began under the assumption of a welfare check. However, the scene that greeted the responding officers was far from typical. The residence was found in disarray, and the eventual discovery of the couple in a bedroom closet, bound in silence with layers of adhesive tape, was a sight that rattled even the most seasoned investigators with 21 years of experience. The scene was staged to resemble a robbery gone awry, with evidence such as a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle and scattered drug paraphernalia, intended to misdirect the police toward local gang activity. For 3 years, the case remained cold, with investigators turning over every stone, interviewing dozens of neighbors, family members, and associates, yet finding no definitive path toward the truth. The turning point did not come through traditional detective work alone, but through the intersection of a separate crime and the precision of forensic science. In the year 2015, the arrest of a young man named Willie Guillory for a felony involving the theft of a horse led to his DNA being entered into the combined database. This profile provided the missing link to the marijuana cigarette recovered at the scene of the murder 3 years prior. When confronted with the evidence, the young man confessed, detailing a harrowing account of how he and his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had been coerced into the residence to stage a robbery and carry out a cold-blooded murder. The confession stripped away the facade of the gang-related hit and exposed a far more calculated plot. The mastermind behind this heinous act was identified as Daphne Wright, a woman who operated as a spiritual advisor to the family. In times of business uncertainty and personal distress, the family had turned to her, believing in her claims that she could remove curses and restore their fortunes. Instead, she exploited their vulnerability and their fear of the supernatural, trapping them in an escalating cycle of debt that eventually amounted to between $250,000 and $280,000. When the money ceased to flow, she demanded the ultimate price, orchestrating the murder of the couple to collect on their life insurance policies. The betrayal was absolute, made even more painful by the revelation that the couple's own son-in-law, Chow Tran, had provided the key to their residence, becoming a pawn in a scheme that cost his own in-laws their lives. The subsequent legal proceedings brought to light the depth of this manipulation. During the trial of Daphne Wright in August of the year 2019, the courtroom was presented with a narrative of greed that outweighed any semblance of humanity. While Chow Tran was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, the prosecution successfully convicted Daphne Wright of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the investigators who stood at the center of this case, The resolution brought a measure of justice. Though it could never restore the lives of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, this story remains a testament to the importance of vigilance and the necessity of justice. Standing as a dark chapter that underscores the dangers of predatory exploitation under the guise of spiritual aid, it is a profound loss of the family and the community. A reminder that the most dangerous traps are often set by those who promise salvation. In the quiet suburban landscape of Arlington, Texas, an act of profound betrayal shattered the peace of a respected immigrant family when Long Nguyen and Ong Le, a devoted couple who had built their lives from nothing after arriving from Vietnam in the year 2000, were found tragically murdered in their home on the 10th of June, 2012. The discovery, initially reported by their son-in-law, Chow Tran, to authorities at 7:29 in the morning, launched a complex investigation that tested the resolve of veteran law enforcement and stunned the local community as the scene, meticulously staged with items suggesting gang involvement, masked a far more intimate and calculated conspiracy. For 3 years, the case remained cold, with investigators baffled by the lack of viable evidence, until a significant breakthrough in 2015 linked a young man named Willie Guillory, who had been 16 years old at the time of the incident, to the scene through deoxyribonucleic acid evidence recovered from a discarded marijuana cigarette. The subsequent interrogation revealed that Willie and his uncle, Bobby Guillory, had been recruited by a Houston-based spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright to carry out the attack. Driven by a cycle of debt and despair that had trapped the family in a web of superstition and financial ruin, the couple, struggling to keep their business afloat, had sought counsel from Wright, believing she could remove perceived curses on their livelihood, a desperate attempt for stability that spiraled into a debt totaling between $250,000 and $280,000. Prosecutors would later contend that Wright, seeing the family as an opportunity to secure significant life insurance payouts, orchestrated the murder plot, ultimately receiving a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole in September of 2019, while the family members left behind continued to grapple with the haunting reality of a tragedy that turned the pursuit of an American dream into a nightmare defined by greed, exploitation, and a profound loss of 2 lives that were deeply woven into the fabric of their neighborhood, reminding us all of the fragility of trust and the enduring necessity of looking out for one another in times of quiet suffering. In the quiet expanse of a residential neighborhood in Arlington, Texas, the morning of June 10th, 2012, began with a chilling discovery that would shatter the peace of a tight-knit community. What initially appeared to be a standard welfare check for a beloved elderly couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, quickly devolved into one of the most harrowing homicide investigations in the history of the local police department. The couple